Hi, everyone. David Aragona here with Ashley Mailloux, taking a look at the Midsummer Derby. Race 12 on the 13 race card Saturday at Saratoga is the Grade 1 Travers Stakes, going a mile and a quarter on the main track for 3-year-olds. And Ashley, field of 7 signed on, not the biggest Travers field we've ever seen, but all the right players are in this race.
This is the quality. You want to see Forte, Arcangelo, Mage, and even a couple of the other horses in here. You get National Treasure, who we know his big win this year came in the Preakness. So I agree. I think you get the major players. Obviously, we'd like more than 7, but as long as the quality's there, I think this is a great race and should be an exciting addition.
Yeah, I agree. It's a cool situation to get to see the Derby winner, Preakness winner, Belmont Stakes winner, and last year's 2-year-old champion Forte all match up in the starting gate in August of their 3-year-old seasons. And some up-and-comers in this race, too. The Curlin Stakes winner, Scotland. There's something positive to be said about every one of the 7 runners signed on in this Travers. Before we get to the main contenders, let's take a look at the Timeform US pace projector for this race to get a sense of how it might be run through the early stages. And actually, I think this is one of the big discussion points as far as handicapping the race goes and what kind of trips the main players are going to get is how fast they go on the front end, because there are a couple of horses in this race that do have good tactical speed. The number 5 National Treasure, obviously gate to wire winner of the Preakness, and also the number 7 Scotland. Do know that the blinkers are coming off National Treasure, so it's going to be interesting to see how that changes his running style, if it does at all.
It will be interesting. And he has raced with blinkers, without them, I should say, in the past. And he wasn't as close to the front as we've seen him in several of his efforts. And it's tough when you look at his Preakness win. They really didn't go fast. He was on the lead naturally, and he was able to really control things from that perspective, going the mile and 3/16 distance. And you see Scotland on the outside, coming out of a lot of one-turn races, got the test last time out, has been forwardly placed. But the interesting one, I think, here, as you can see, in terms of the pace projection, you see Disarm up there, and we do know the blinkers are going on, and it just feels like David in his last 2, they've tried to have him involved earlier in his races than we've seen in the past.
Yeah, I would not be surprised if he's a bit more forwardly placed. We do give a slight pace bump to the pace figures of the horses that do add blinkers in the pace projector, so that's why Disarm is shown a little bit up closer than some might expect on the pace projector. And do note, the number 4 Mage gets the LP flag. He'd be happy if some pace does develop up front, having the best Timeform US late pace rating in this field. Well, let's go through the main contenders in post position order, beginning with the number 1 Forte, and we'll take a look at his most recent victory in the Grade 2 Jim Dandy back at the end of July. And a lot of controversy in this race, Ashley, about bumping in the stretch. Should there have been a change or not? But regardless of all of that, putting it aside, Forte just ran his usual good race here. He's really gritty. And I think the blinkers did the job they were supposed to do, because he was much more engaged through the middle portions of the race.
I agree. You know, there was a reason they put blinkers on, and it seems like it worked. He's going to race with them again. And I think the big thing, looking at his running style, you said it, he's gritty. I think he's a grinder. When he hits his best strides, it usually takes him a little longer to hit them. So to me, you know, stretching out now from that 1 1/8 effort back to a 1 1/4, I think that suits his running style. He is the horse to beat here. His resume basically says everything that we need to know.
Yeah, he was second in the Belmont Stakes, so distance not supposed to be a problem for him. He just shows up every time. Definitely the horse to beat. Just have to decide how short a price you want to take on the morning line favorite. The number 2 is Arcangelo. Let's take a look at his big victory in the Grade 1 Belmont Stakes, the 3rd jewel of the Triple Crown. And Ashley, he got a fantastic ride this day from Javier Castellano, who just saved ground every step of the way, slipped through along the inside of the top of the stretch. And this horse's stamina really came through in the late stages as he was able to put away his rivals. We'll see if he can back it up, because he's coming off a layoff here into the Travers.
You know, the layoff's the question, right? We haven't seen him in over 2 months. We saw him this day, June 10th. So it's been a while since we've seen him. It sounds like his connections, though, this was a strategic move. They feel like he's the type of horse that he's fine off the shelf. And we saw that. We saw that between his, that effort January 14th at Gulfstream. They gave him a couple of months, and he was just better off the layoff. And then he had those 3 solid races. So I'm not that concerned about the layoff. I think he's been really well managed, and to me, that was his breakthrough performance. You can look at the Peter Pan, and, you know, he was the winner of it. It was a good performance, but I was really visually impressed by what we saw in the Belmont. That takes a different level of horse. And you've already mentioned Javier's ride. I mean, that certainly helped. And Javier's season has just so far been so incredible.
Yeah, he's definitely been expertly managed by Jenna Antonucci up until this point. We'll see if coming into this race off the layoff proves to be the right move, but he has looked good in the last couple months training up to this Travers Stakes. The number 3 is Tapit Trice. We'll take a look at his past performances in Time Form US. And actually, this horse has been a little bit of a disappointment to many. There was so much hype surrounding him coming into the Kentucky Derby. He went off as the second choice in that race, just didn't really handle the situation. He probably ran better than the finish would indicate in the Belmont Stakes because that was a tough trip, making that early move around the far turn, going widest of all. And then last time out in the Haskell, just got into some traffic trouble, but obviously didn't show up with his best effort this day. They're making some changes for this race, putting on the blinkers and rider switch to Jose Ortiz.
The blinkers, again, this is a common move now that we're seeing a little bit later in the season with a couple of these horses. I'm really curious what the blinkers are going to do for him, because when you go back to getting towards the Triple Crown Trail and all the Derby prep races, he was just in a position where he does not like to leave the gate very quickly. He kind of leaves a lot to be done in the final stages, and he had been able to do that. We saw the performance at the Tampa Bay Derby and then at Keeneland in the Bluegrass, where I thought he looked sensational, and he really had to work for it with verifying, kind of putting it to him in the stretch. But you're right, he has been a little bit of a disappointment. I agree with you. I do think the Belmont, if you watch the replay says it all. It's better than what you would see on paper. And he was still third in that race. He wasn't beaten by much, a length and a half to be specific. And he really didn't miss Forte by much. And I want to point that out, obviously, just knowing that Forte is the horse to beat in here. But his Haskell performance did leave things to be desired, but they've made the equipment change, and we'll see what he can do. He's still an honest horse, so I don't think can be, disregarded in this race, especially knowing everyone's taught he does want to go long.
Yeah, I'm pretty interested in some of the changes that he's getting here. The blinkers hopefully keep him a little more engaged, maybe better leaving the gate, but also the rider switch to Jose Ortiz. Nothing against Luis Saez, and obviously wish him a speedy recovery after the incident earlier in the week at Saratoga. He will be off his expected Travers mount, which will be Mage, we'll talk about next. But Jose Ortiz is just a different kind of rider than Luis Saez, maybe giving this horse a more of an opportunity to relax and make one run at a better timed portion of the race. He's got some talent in there if he can finally put it all together. The number 4 is the Kentucky Derby winner Mage. And let's take a look at his last race when he was second in the Haskell Stakes. And Ashley, if the connections were just looking for this to be a prep, I think they got exactly what they wanted out of it, because this horse put in a nice effort to just get to the quarter pole, put his head in front, but couldn't quite go with Go Rocket Ride in the late stages. Maybe some of that lack of fitness coming through, but he's training pretty well in the months since then. And now he's second off the layoff. We know he handles the mile and a quarter distance.
I thought it was a huge effort. Go Rocket Ride was just on a different level on Haskell Day and really took to the surface for trainer Richard Mandella. But looking at Mage, his connections were thinking about not going to the Haskell. They thought about bypassing it, going, strictly, maybe indirectly, I should say, to the Travers, and they decided to use it. So I agree. I do think it truly was a prep race, and that was by design. And still, I think he raced better than even maybe I personally expected. He's had an interesting campaign throughout, but he's intriguing. And again, if the pace in here ends up being just even moderate, he's still going to have that late kick that he's shown just about every single start, even when he's broke horribly. I still think about his Florida Derby performance. He's a very nice racehorse. I mean, he finished second to Forte, and it looked like at one point if Forte didn't hit his best strides, maybe Mage was going to sneak away.
Yeah, I think there's an argument he might have run the better race than Forte in the Florida Derby, given the trip that he had. And I'm encouraged to see that he's broken a little bit better in his last couple of starts, both in the Preakness and the Haskell. So maybe Mage is putting it all together. The number 5 is National Treasure. Let's take a look at his big victory in the Great Run Preakness, 2 starts back for him. And I think the trip just told the story this day as he got to the front end in a race that did not have much pace signed on. It was basically just a merry-go-round affair. There's Mage on the outside trying to close, but really nobody could make up much ground into this moderate pace. They tried a mile and a half last time in the Belmont. That just wasn't the right distance for him. He's cutting back now, but I think he really has to prove that he can do it against a tougher field with maybe a more competitive pace situation.
I completely agree. You look at the Preakness, as you mentioned, he set really moderate fractions, especially, compared to some of even the other races that he came out of, to see what they were able to do. Almost 49 flat to the opening half is pretty slow in that race. And Johnny rode the race beautifully, got the trip that he wanted. No one pressured him. And he did have to hold off Blazing Sevens in the end. But to me, Blazing Sevens maybe still ran the better of the race, knowing that he was not on the front, kind of just galloping, loping along. So I'm going to draw a line through the Belmont. As you said, it was going too long. I think the blinkers off is intriguing in a race where, to me, there's mainly two pace horses on paper. They decided to take them off. So I just don't know if it's just maybe hopefully he can settle more on the front end. I'm not sure about the equipment change, but one thing's for sure, Johnny's going to know the trip that he wants from the horse and what he wants to get, and he probably gets this horse in that position. I'm just not sure against this group if he's that level of horse.
And speaking of blinker changes, we've got another one with the number 6 Disarm, who is putting the blinkers on for the first time as he comes out of a 4th place finish in the Jim Dandy. And, you can't knock this horse's form because he's been improving with every start. He's just been a cut below some of the top 3-year-olds out there. Didn't really have a big excuse in the Kentucky Derby, though he outran his odds in that race. Got the job done against weaker in the Matt Win. And then last time out in the Jim Dandy, he finished 4th by only 2 1/4 lengths, but never really looked like he was getting there in that race. So I get why Steve is putting the blinkers on, just wants to maybe coax a little bit more out of this horse.
He's a little bit of a plotter. He tends to get, the checks that are they're good to cash, but it's just not been enough. And I think when we talk about performances in the Louisiana Derby, he was probably more impressive than the winner, Kings Barnes, who was able to get to the front even at a mile and 3/16. It's kind of like a national treasure situation if you think about it. And so I do think Disarm, that's where he got hyped up a bit. Mile and 3/16. Obviously, they thought he should, like stretching out in distance. And his Derby performance still, though, I think is admirable. It's a respectable performance, but he did race probably his best race as of late was in the Matt Win, and he's had those 3 triple-digit buyers consecutively. I'm just curious, knowing how the Jim Dandy worked out for him, how can he take a step forward? And maybe part of it, though, is the distance and the equipment change.
And rounding up the field on the outside is the number 7 Scotland. We'll take a look at his victory last time out in the Curlin. And Ashley, it feels like every year the Curlin winner attracts some buzz coming into the Travers. It's always the late developing, improving type of 3-year-old. Over the years, though, the Curlin has not been the most productive Travers prep. Obviously, the E-Day did win at a big price almost 10 years ago at this point. But Scotland got the job done here, beating Il Miracolo, who did come back to win at Parks earlier in the week. It's just a big step up in class for a horse that has never faced 3-year-olds of this caliber.
It is a huge step up in class. And as you've mentioned, he's coming out of the Curl in a restricted race. Now he's going into the deep waters, he's going into the Grade 1 event. He's also stretching out where his first 3 career races were all at the 1-turn distance. And you can't fault him. He's really done nothing wrong. But the question is, can he handle this level of competition? And I like that you pointed out he's more of a late developing 3-year-old. They were not in a rush to get into the races. We didn't see him as a 2-year-old. And just thinking about Bill Mott's horses that he has in his barn, he gets a lot of horses that they do develop later, especially thinking about years from now, his older horses. He's very good with these types of horses. So I think Bill wants to test him, and this is the spot to try. And he's going to have to, again, take a huge step forward, as he's going to only go 2 turns for the second time in the career. And a 1.25 miles, it's not easy.
Well, it's a really intriguing Travers, going to go a long way towards deciding 3-year-old divisional honors. Let's see who we picked in this race. And Ashley, can't blame you for going with Forte. You just know you're always going to get a good effort from this horse. He shows up every time. And as you said, he's really gritty. He's going to fight for it.
And he should love the 1.25 miles. We've seen his performances. Distance is not any sort of limitation for him. We're a couple in here, you wonder what's going to happen, and things might have to unfold a certain way for them to be successful. I just think, looking at the trips that he's had, he's been able to overcome some tough trips. There's been other performances where, as we've talked about, maybe horses that finished behind him ran more impressively, but he's still getting the job done. So he is going to be a short price. I'm going to have to, eat chalk in this spot. But I found it hard when I looked at others to make as strong as a case. There were other horses I liked, but I didn't necessarily feel like, in terms of the case that I can make for them, would be good enough to put him on the top spot.
Yeah, I certainly respect Forte. I respect the Belmont Stakes winner, Arcangelo. Was sort of leaning towards Mage. I think he's going to appreciate that prep he got in the Haskell last time, but ultimately put the number 3 Tapit Trice on top. Going to keep the faith for one more race for the horse that's getting some changes that I think he needs. He's finally going to be a bigger price than he's been in some recent starts, and I think he's had some legitimate excuses. So the number 3 Tapit Trice for me, and the number 1 Forte for Ashley in the Grade 1 Travers on Saturday at Saratoga. Good luck if you're playing the races this weekend.